So let's stay with these proposed austerity measures. The Free Market Foundation believes budget cuts are an opportunity, not necessarily a problem. It says the measures are a sign of fiscal prudence amid reckless and wasteful expenditure. The Free Market Foundation's CEO David Ansara joins us now. Mr. Ansara, thank you so much for your time. Treasury released a note last week warning about massive spending pressure on government. I believe the budget deficit is now at over 143 billion rand, which is higher than predicted. Do you believe that we're heading for this so-called fiscal cliff that everyone talks about, where I believe we just simply would then run out of money, cannot sustain government spending?
Well, Sally, that is a huge risk that you have flagged and that we at the Free Market Foundation are very concerned about. As you say, fiscal prudence, managing public finances is really critical if you want to get economic growth going, if you want to see prosperity in your society. At the moment, the government is spending well beyond its means. This is quite different to the situation that the finance minister presented in his February budget. At that time, Treasury was projecting a primary fiscal surplus. So if you exclude debt servicing costs, we were looking like we were just about breaking even in terms of that balance between spending and revenue. Obviously, debt is still a huge concern, going up to projected around 72% of GDP. That is a massive red flag for our public finances. But since then, the fiscal situation has deteriorated dramatically. At that time, they were looking at a 4% fiscal deficit, but now banks like HSBC in London, Moody's, the ratings agency, are projecting an additional 1% deficit on that, so up to a 5% deficit. So this is a function of poor policy decisions that are made by the government. The government is too big, its scope is too wide, and it is crowding out the private sector, and that is limiting growth. Free enterprise is not allowed to flourish. Government is spending way too much. We have too many civil servants who are not productive enough. They are a drain on public finances. So we support the finance minister's call for budget cuts. We would urge him to go even further, though, than what he has proposed.
So one of the proposals that you have is to cut cabinet down while staying within the constitutional obligations. What does that mean? How much would it save?
Well, the Constitution is actually quite clear in terms of which ministries are necessary and needed in government. So, at the moment, the text is pretty clear. It says the cabinet positions of president, deputy president, finance, cooperative governance, justice, defence and police are kind of the only mandated portfolios. So we are proposing that government reduces the number of cabinet portfolios from 30, which is really unprecedented for a developing market economy such as ours, to only 10. So what we would say is let's tighten our administrative capacity. Let's focus on really the core aspects of governance. So the presidency, finance, defense, which could include safety and security, justice, home affairs that could incorporate police and correctional services, international relations, social development, for example, could include all of these superfluous ministries like forestry and fisheries, the environment. The Labour Department is essentially a very damaging department. It creates a raft of unnecessary and restrictive labour regulations that are really accelerating and making our unemployment crisis worse. We would also call for the complete dissolution of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Its very state-led approach, aggressive industrial policy, is actually having the opposite effect of what it claims to do. It is actually destroying our manufacturing and trade capabilities. So this is a radical proposal, but we think that fiscal conservatism is something to be embraced. It's not something to be begrudgingly implemented. This shows a sense of maturity in terms of public finance.
So you're saying, I mean, what I'm picking up is that you're saying a lot of these cabinet positions, not that you have a problem with trade and not that you have a problem with the environment as such, but what you're saying is, in your view, they're ineffective And really what government needs to do is create the right regulatory framework and then get out of the way so that the private sector can grow the economy. But realistically, I mean, how much would that actually save in terms of money? Because really the bottom line is what we've got to look at as well.
Well, I think it would save quite a bit. If you consider that Minister Godongwana's proposal is a reduction of spending by 25 billion rand, that might seem like a lot of money, but in April of this year, the public sector unions negotiated a wage increase of 7.5%. It's above inflation, and that amounted to a total of 37 billion rand extra that was now being put on the shoulders of taxpayers to foot that bill. Even if you look at the amount of blowback that Minister Godongwana is getting for this proposal, I mean, it pales in comparison to some of the increases that public sector wages.
So how do we cut? Sorry to jump in, but you mentioned that there's a lot of civil servants that are not as effective as they should be. But how do we trim the fat from the budget without destroying much needed services? I mean, if you look at our hospitals, they're strained already. They don't have enough nurses, for example. How do we get this balance right?
Well, I think you need to look not only at the quantity, the number of public servants, but the quality of those servants. At the moment, South Africa spends well above global averages in terms of developing market economies on our education system. We have some of the highest per capita expenditure on education in the world. Most children get access to free education, but the quality of that education is very poor. And why is that? Well, the trade unions that form part of the tripartite alliance refuse to implement performance monitoring mechanisms. They do not punish delinquent teachers who don't show up for school on a Monday morning. Nurses in our public hospitals don't provide the necessary care for patients because there's very little consequence to them if they don't perform. So we, I think, need to take a very critical approach to our public service. Essentially, what is driving this is this idea of cadre deployment, that the state is not an independent set of institutions that is designed to provide services. It is seen as a vehicle of patronage for politically connected elites.
Yeah.
And
All right.
that is why they refuse to implement these performance monitoring mechanisms.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. CEO of the Free Market Foundation, David Ansara, in support of the Finance Minister, saying we have to become more fiscally prudent.